All righty, it looks like we're live. I'm very, very excited. I am here. This is Charissa talking with Baltimore's own author, Kris Faatz, rhymes with Kaatz. I'm going to say that probably a few times during this. I'm going to take off this gorgeous graphic that I created and put on this banner with all the good information. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So obviously no spoilers today. We're going to talk about your new novel, 14 Stones, which launches on Tuesday. But I just finished it and I can't wait for like an official review to talk about how much I loved it. Because I didn't know what to expect, right? Like I didn't know. I don't know you. I didn't know you very well then. And it is mesmerizing. It is so good.
Oh, thank you.
We'll get into that. Like, I mean, obviously I'll rate it with a bunch of stars, but like, you know, I'm not going to tell you now because it's early. So let's kick off a little bit. I've heard you do the description of the book a few times, but I'm hoping you'll give like a more thorough, like touchy-feely kind of feeling on what this book is. How would you describe it? Not just your elevator pitch, but kind of like and what it means to you.
Sure. So, okay, I'll start with the elevator pitch because that's been the thing.
Easier.
So 14 Stones is kind of boiling it down was really tough. So getting that pitch was a tough one, but it basically is a story of a group of refugees. They are a tribal people who have never really felt that they had a secure homeland because wherever they are, they tend to be driven out by the ruling powers that be. And so they are seeking a homeland, and it is a story about their journey and how their journey changes the futures of two countries and also changes the lives of everyone that they interact with. And for me, it's kind of a funny thing. So it was my first full-length fantasy book. Up until I wrote this, I had considered myself very much a literary, you're supposed to write real stories about real people and all of this. So this was kind of a venture, and I found that I really enjoyed world building and creating fantasy and having that much freedom. So that was really fun. But it also became personal in a way that I hadn't expected. When I realized I was writing a fantasy, I was like, oh, great, fantasy, that's going to be, I don't know, commercial, it's going to be genre, it's going to be, whatever. And then I really started to fall in love with the characters, with the people. And I also found myself, and again, I don't know spoilers, but it became very important to me to sort of comment on things that I saw going on in the world at the time that I was writing it, which was a few years ago. But unfortunately, I feel like all of those things are still very relevant and active now. And so it became kind of a way to reflect on what was happening in the world. And that was super important to me. So 14 Stones kind of feels like James Baldwin talks about, writers write because we want to change the world, and we know we can't do it on any kind of grand scale, but every time we reach one reader, we've created a millimeter of change. So I feel like 14 Stones is my millimeter. That's what I like to say about it.
It's lovely. I think it's a little more than a millimeter, honestly. Like it's so much more, and I'm not trying to like slam you at all. I didn't know. It's so much more than I thought of when it just kept evolving and going places. Okay, I got to go to my notes. Right. So, okay, we're teasing 14 Stones. I've said it's amazing. You've given a description. I know because I've talked to you that you like to do the writing contests. You are a writing teacher. You immerse yourself like in your work. Where did the story originate? Because there's an epilogue that is referenced. And then there's the story that unfolds out of it. Like, where did it come from?
Yeah. So the first seeds of it, I sort of found. My husband and I were in Spain in 2015. We were exploring the northwestern kind of corner, Galicia and Asturias especially. And it was still is the first time I've ever been abroad. And one of the places that we went to see an Iron Age settlement. So kind of the remnants of this Iron Age village. And what you could see basically was the foundations of buildings. And they were these little round, they've been little round houses. And what was amazing was we were in this ancient place, where people hadn't lived for, probably, I'm not sure, a couple few thousand years. but there was such a strong sense of home and homeland, and this was someone's home, and this was a place that they loved and that they cared about. And that just kind of implanted itself. And so I started thinking about, I'd really love to do a story that deals with that kind of feeling and that very strong sense of home. And then the circle buildings, I played around with that shape, and that becomes a very significant thing in 14 Stones. But that was where the first seeds came from. And I came back with some ideas about characters and setting. Some of the setting of the book, one of my fictional countries, Namora, is very much based on Spain and that northwestern corner and what it looks like. So that was where it first came from. And then it started to take me in surprising directions. And it took me a few years to figure out what it wanted to be. So a lot of that was just kind of letting the story tell me where it wanted to go.
So was the epilogue written after, before? Like, what's the epilogue is so important, right? And it kind of sets a tone. So like, was that something that you wrote first? Actually,
no. So the prologue was,
prologue,
it kind of came last.
Gracious. It's early.
No, you're good. You're good.
You're like, what is she talking about?
No.
Yeah,
I was like, okay.
You're on.
Yeah, so the whole book, the way it's set up now, it kind of grows out of this folktale that's presented as prologue. And that actually came last. So I knew that it was going to be significant, and I'd written, the whole thing, and I knew I was going to be coming back and creating this little story that was going to sort of, set the tone and sort of encapsulate a few themes, and without, again, saying too much. But that evolved. That was the very last thing I drafted. So I'd had time to really think about, what do I need to do in this little story?
Because it's funny when you and I didn't really do it. One of those writing competitions, and I sent you my very lame story of what I did with 100 words, and you were kind of giving me tips. I was like, when I was reading the prologue, I was like, this is how it happened. I know it. I know she had stone and water, and she had to put it together, but I'm completely wrong on that.
I knew enough about those elements, the stones, the water, the houses, the buildings, that was all in there. And so that was all part of the book. And then, it was a question of kind of backing and filling and saying, okay, how are you going to create this setup?
That is so interesting because, in your brain as a reader, you have all these concepts about how words are pronounced or how things came about. And it's a complete reversal of what I was thinking in my head. That is amazing. So who was the first character?
The first one was my Namoran priest, Rebus Silvicus, who was also my favorite. And he was very much the driving force behind the whole story. So, yeah.
When you posted, I think it was a week ago, about favorite characters, and I wasn't finished with the book yet. So I'm going to mispronounce all these names because side story, I have a tendency to come up with the pronunciation in my head, and then you can't mess with it while you're reading the book. It has to stay with this mispronounced word. And with a name like Charissa, right? Like you'd think. But anyway, so Kari?
Yes,
Kari. Okay. So I was just so passionately in love with her because she's so young, and weight of the world a little bit on her shoulders. But I think you're right. You're going to say Rebus, but his nickname is Rebe.
Rebe.
Yeah.
Yes.
See? Oh, I'm not too far.
Got it.
But yeah, he definitely is I don't want to say the main character, but such a driving force with such a lovely human connection and personality, and kind of I don't know if it's everything you want to be exactly, but you want your best friend or dad or husband to be just like that. No offense.
Right.
He's not like that. That's really bad now. But you know what I mean? You want to know the guy. You want to be in his orbit, I guess is my point.
Yeah. Yeah. He was the first character that I started to experiment with, and my original idea of him was pretty different. And so that was one of those processes where he started telling me this is who I am, and I started going with it. Sorry?
I'm writing it down for labor. We're totally talking about that when we can talk about spoilers at a later date.
Oh, okay.
I'm writing that down. That's a good one.
Okay.
Okay, keep going. It was different.
Sure. Yeah, it was pretty different. And then when I started to figure some things out about him, and especially the physical issue with him. Again, try not to say too much, but that was a big piece of who he was. And when I saw how he was dealing with that in particular, he definitely became the person that, yeah, I would like to be more like him, and I would certainly like to know someone like him. So that was a lot of where that came from.
Your descriptions are so beautiful because there are a number of, I mean, even the clothing, right? Like every time he changed clothing, and I won't go in too far, I could picture it, right? I could picture it. The circle shaped building that you talk about, I could picture it. The ceremonial, like I want to do the ceremony, you know? Like I could imagine myself being there, and I could feel what I imagined, especially when strangers came and did those things, what they felt, right? And how they could easily connect with this religion or whatever that is like outside of their belief system. It was really kind of beautiful how you did that, because my guess is, you mentioned real life things happening in the world, and there's a lot of that, right? That we feel that we can't find commonality, whether it's religious commonality, political, countries. And there was a lot of that in this book, right? There was a lot of like people feeling really standoffish about someone else's lifestyle or religion or whatever, and then kind of finding comfort in it or understanding it or having respect for it. So that was really, really beautiful. Like I definitely recognized that. I loved it. I loved it. It was beautiful. And I do want to be in the circle building so badly. I want to see it all, right? I want the ceremony of it. Okay. So you already talked about, I think, Namora was more like Spain. So what about Lasar?
Lasar kind of is its own thing, and where that came from. So you have, and I think I can risk describing this a little bit because it's just kind of upfront in the book, but you have Lasar is this huge country, and it's a military superpower basically. And then its next door neighbors, it has 3 very small next door neighbors. Namora is the most important for the purposes of this book. It's the most important of those 3. So what I was thinking about was the history of Russia when it was the USSR, and its relationships with its much smaller neighbors, particularly when you talk about the communist revolution and the communist takeover of, say, the Baltic Republic. So my family on my mother's side has Lithuanian heritage, and my great-grandmother emigrated to the US prior to all of that, prior to the communist revolution. And when it happened, and when Lithuania was absorbed into the USSR, she lost touch with her family back home, and kind of never knew what happened to people back home. So that was kind of what was in my head when I was setting up the geopolitical stuff in this story, was just the idea of, you have this huge, this massive country with a ruler who tends to feel that he's got the right to kind of do whatever he wants. And so Lasar, I wouldn't say that geographically it's meant to look like Russia necessarily, because I don't know enough about Russia, but that is where all of the names of the regions come from. That's all the language. Its language is Russian based. So that was what was in my head. Well,
and I wasn't planning to talk about it, but I started looking up some of the like word origins that you used. And I was like, where's the language? Like some of them were more like Russian or Eastern European. I think there was 1 or 2 that was more like Hebrew. I can't remember exactly what it was, and maybe not intentional, right? I just looked it up and I'm like, oh, like where's she going with this? Like, because I can't help myself. But okay, so that's interesting. So a lot of the basis of the naming systems are Russian.
Yeah, for Lasar, and then for Namora, the language is based on Lithuanian. And for the tribal people, that language is based on Hindi, which is something I know virtually nothing about. So I was doing a lot of looking up. Yeah.
But it's brilliant because each of them felt like they were self-contained. You know what I mean? Obviously, the story doesn't go anywhere if they don't like bleed into each other, like we're not just having a story about one people and like, hey, let's set the mountain. But like, it felt so deep and thorough. So what about the naming system of the months and the seasons, kind of, right? Planting and the weekdays, because there are 8 weekdays. What the heck? That was super cool. I was so intimidated. I'm like, am I going to have a test?
Yeah. Yeah, I decided there should be 8 weekdays just to make this world different from ours. I didn't want it to be just identical. So I figured, 8 days and then 4 weeks per month, and so you have exactly 32 days and all that. It was nice and organized. Yeah, so the names of the months are all derived from Lithuanian words, and they each have meanings. And I don't know if I could list them, but if you want me to go there. But they're kind of funny because some of them are just number names. So there's like, the month that's called 4 and the month that's called 5. And then there's the month that's called fish because this is when, that's prime fishing season. And then there's the month that's planting, which is planting season. So this particular story starts in Durla, which is the 10th month, and that's the harvest month. And it kind of goes up into the spring. So it ends in Ivesta, which is the planting month, which is the 3rd month of the year. So that's where yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think we need to release a study guide, right? Like things like this. I mean, you do a great job because it's in the book, right? Pronunciations are in the book, even though I'm sure like I changed everything in my own head. But like a study guide, right? That talks about like the Lithuanian origins of everything. It'd be great. It'd be a great like follow-up excerpt, Appendix A.
That's true. That would be fun.
And you teach, so Appendix A is like in your wheelhouse, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so I can go here because it's not in the book. So there are 4 countries. Like sequels on other countries. Like you created this world, right? That like didn't get vetted all the way.
Yes, yeah, I've thought about that. I've definitely thought about at least one sequel. I was also thinking about a prequel that focuses on Lasar and how it became the country that we see in 14 Stones. I thought that might be interesting, but I don't know much about the other 2. So, and the other thing is that this is like one continent in a bigger world, and I know nothing about the other continents. So like, I feel like there's a lot of potential,
There's time.
So there's time, yeah. But the other 2 little countries, I really don't know anything about them. So that would be something I'd have to play with.
That sounds like super fun playtime. It's like Sandbox for adults.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about like world building. I have cards, okay, because I had to get all my notes on cards. So don't judge me for cards. And now they seem really lost. Why? You just said you wanted to create this world that really felt vetted, right? That felt real, that had depth of character. Which for any of us who read fantasy and like, I'll throw out Lord of the Rings as an example because it's like crazy,
it's the one.
Whole new, okay.
Yes.
So you walk into the world and you feel like the world has a history and things that you don't know about, right? You're only seeing this little snapshot. Like to me, that's like excellent world building. It's not like, by the way, in this world, like cats look like dogs. Lesson that'll be important to the story. There's so much behind it, right? So like, why the story stands on its own? Why drop it into a new world that you have to create from scratch? Like, I wouldn't drop it into Manhattan, but like, why would you could drop it into Spain? Like, why did you choose? I'm going to make this effort, right, to build this place that is new and unique.
So the very first version of the story that I was playing with when we were in Spain and when I was getting these ideas was also kind of was going to have a different focus because I was fascinated with the history of the ancient churches there. We were, looking at churches from the 900s, and it just kind of boggled my mind. And so I got really interested in particularly the idea of religious pilgrimage. And back when, people would make these epic journeys to Jerusalem and come back with a relic, a holy relic of some kind. And that would be what you have in your cathedral. And that's why everyone's going to come. So I was playing with that idea at first. And I was thinking of trying to write some kind of historical thing about, historical fiction, but dealing with that idea of pilgrimage. And getting into, doing tons of research and just getting into the whole, so what was going on? Yeah, well, and that's what happened because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be researching this for the next 10 years and I'm never going to write anything. And so that was when I thought, you know what, let's make it fantasy because then I can do
that's brilliant, right? And you can invent it all on your own.
Exactly, and then of course I thought that was going to be a shortcut, but then it was like, oh, well, now you're creating a world, so now you have to think about how to make it real, and who are these people and how is their world set up. So I'm not sure it ended up being a lot less work, but it felt like it at the time. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Like obviously I read historical fiction, and I was not a history buff ever. So like it's been alarming to me that is one of the joys that I have is historical fiction. But like it does, when you read a story that takes place in like World War I, you're like, how did they know? Like the layers of the dates and the battles and the, I don't know how anyone does that. The mind of a writer is like amazing that you can hold all of that in your head at one time.
It's a big file cabinet, and then everything gets mixed up and you have to resort it out. Yeah.
Yes. Right. I can't wait. I mean, obviously you're launching 14 Stones in a couple days, but like, I'm not going to lie. I can't wait for like the next thing. Like, I really want to know about those other lands, right? I really want to know maybe not what happens with some of the characters after, right?
Yes.
Or their descendants as a result of all of this activity, right? Of the story.
Right.
Genre. Okay. When you first described it as fantasy, I was like, what? Really? Fantasy? And then I did my research thing and I started like deep diving into, definition of genres. I'm going to read you one. It's going to be terribly boring. But no, because I was like, okay, what defines fantasy? Like how, why is this fantasy? Why did that come to mind first? And lost the card. So it doesn't really matter. But I looked up Lord of the Rings. I was like, okay, Lord of the Rings. What's Lord of the Rings? Epic high fantasy. I don't know what that means, but like that's the definition they used. And I was like, okay. So that's like a layer for me. And I tend to like dystopian. So I looked up dystopian and I looked up Hunger Games. And it was sci-fi. And I was like,
sci-fi. Yeah.
What? So that totally confused me. But then I looked up dystopian and I defined it because I wanted to see like maybe how you reacted to the dystopian definition, not to make you realign your book because it's already what it is. But it says relating to or denoting an imagined state or society where there is a great suffering or injustice. No wonder I connected to it, right? I mean, I read fantasy too, but I was like, yes. It's like dystopian fantasy.
Yes. And actually, I think that's fair. And I've had people mention that. And I never thought of it as dystopian myself, because to me, that's like a very dark, I think of like dystopian sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, all of that, which is not usually my kind of thing. I actually kind of shy away from reading stuff.
And this is a very positive book, right? It's not dark at all. There's struggles, but it's not dark.
Right. Yeah. It kind of has that dark thing at the core, but I didn't want that to be sort of the point, so, but yes, I definitely see how that relates to that story.
Okay. So, what have I not covered that you want to cover? I mean, we talked about connection. I wanted to talk about world building, which is just fascinating to me. Like, what do you think people need to know about this book other than a description? Like who, let's go here. Who, as a writer and reader hat on, would you say would love this book? People who love blank are going to love this from the writer.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I was thinking about, because the one thing that seems to have, that comes out from folks who have read it is that it's very surprising, that it is hard to categorize, that it doesn't go where you think it's going to go, that it sets up a lot and then things head in different directions, but that ultimately that is very satisfying, which is great for me to hear because it went where it wanted to go. So I think maybe, folks who are looking for something a little unexpected, a little different, I think that folks who are thinking about state of the world stuff, maybe wanting to engage with, I definitely think people who are wanting to engage with state of the world problems, this would be a satisfying read just from a kind of, okay, here's one way of looking at it, or here's exactly. Yeah. As far as I know that fantasy readers do like it. but also that it falls in that sort of crossover category where, so, if you're looking for dragons, you're not going to find them here.
That was going to be my joke. You took away my joke. Yes. No dragons.
I'm sorry, no dragons. But there is magic. It's subtle magic, I think is a good way to put it. It's, in some ways, it's definitely a coming of age story. So if you like that, but I think it straddles that genre maybe divide between fantasy and literary. So it's very, very character driven. So if you like getting to know people, really kind of living with them, if you like that kind of story, you would definitely enjoy this. I would also say it's for readers who appreciate kind of a gentler pace and kind of sitting with the story and savoring it. It is not super fast paced. It's not super driven. So if you're looking for kind of a gentle and gradually unfolding experience, this is definitely that kind of book.
That's well said, because I think it is long, not in a bad way, but I mean, it's substantial. It's I don't know how many pages. I read the Kindle, right? Like I read it on Kindle, so I'm sure you can tell me, but it's substantial. Like, right when you think that maybe something may shift and change, you're like, oh, there's still half the book left, and no, but not in a bad way, because, as readers, and this, there is nothing more disappointing than ending a book where you actually identified and connected to the characters. So like you start to panic, right? When, at least I do. And I'm like 75% of the way through the book, I want to know how it resolves, but I also do not want it to end. And I start sort of panicking on like how fast that's going to happen. And this is it does get quicker towards the end when things start really churning and burning and happening. But like it's not too fast. Like you really tell the story, and your descriptions are gorgeous. Obviously I want to go see all these places now. Like I want more. But you didn't cheapen anything. You really, there's so many layers to this, Kris. So many like mood layers, scenery layers, people interaction layers. We didn't even mention like, Valda and like all these people with all these things. Like there isn't a character in here that you hate. You know what I mean?
Oh, good.
But I mean, like sometimes there's an antagonist, right? Like, and they're all approachable in their own way, and they're all likable and identifiable, and you feel connected a bit to all of them in different ways. So it was really brilliant how you did that. I don't know. It was just,
thank you.
I like them all.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it started out, I had ideas about an antagonist, and then what I found was one of the things that I kind of wanted to look at was what's behind people's behavior. When you have somebody who's doing things a certain way, acting a certain way, I guess it's, what is that kind of truism about we've all got battles that nobody sees. And so I kind of took that and said, yeah, you know what, let's have that be true here. And it's never as simple as, oh, this is the bad guy, right? There's always something else. There's another layer. So that's very much something I wanted to do. And I'm glad it sounds like it worked. So that's
it did. And I know exactly who you're talking about.
Do you?
Okay. A couple of people, I'm like, but he's not a bad guy.
Yes.
He just has issues, right? He's got stuff
he
going
has
on.
Issues.
Julie just said, Julie just made a comment. It's funny. I had it in my notes, but then I like lost the card or whatever. But she said, would you say it has a paranormal or magical realism aspect to it?
Sure. And I say that cautiously.
Elaborate.
Okay. So there are
paranormal.
Two characters.
I thought that a little bit.
Paranormal.
Like, is it magic or is it paranormal, right? The thing that we won't talk about.
The thing or the two things we could talk. There are two things.
Okay, two things. Yeah. One of them felt more spiritual to me, so I guess I was
okay. You're thinking of the one thing.
See, now they have to read the book because they're so confused at what we're talking about.
Right. What are you talking about? Okay, so there are two characters who can do things that are not things typical. That normal people can do, basically. And I would say that one of those characters, the thing that he can do, it certainly heads in the direction of magic. It's not really, in the context of the world, it's not really considered to be magic, but okay, yeah, paranormal or magical realism, that's that would be a fair thing to call it, I think. Yeah. So in my head, I think I always sort of considered it like magic in its effects, but yeah, the character himself doesn't see it that way. So now that I've made it even more
That's
confusing.
interesting that he doesn't see it that way. Oh, we
No,
need to get
no.
that out. We can't talk
Mm-mm.
about it now. I
Darn.
want to know what he thinks. I want to know what he thinks now. Okay.
Oh, I
Tune
could tell
in
you
for
a lot.
another chat. Well, I mean, because it's substantial, right? It's very important to the plot, and it's something like I've never heard of before, right?
Mhm,
So this
mhm.
thing we're not going to talk about because we don't want to give it away. But you got
I
to read the
will
book.
say he has kind of a love-hate relationship with it. I will say that.
I would
The
understand that.
fact that he can do this thing has always been a challenge. It's something he didn't necessarily want.
A gift and a burden.
A gift
right?
and a burden, exactly. Yeah, it was a trade for him. It's always been a trade, and it was a trade that he was not happy to have made, but it was what was there.
I love this man. I love this man. Okay.
I'm so
All
glad.
right. I don't know how many cards I have left. And now cards are all over the place. But we'll wrap up. For anyone who's joined us or watches this, and you, Kris, of course, you can share it. Her novel, 14 Stones. Do you have it there? Can you show the cover? Because I don't have mine yet.
1 second. It's behind me. I'll be right back.
Okay, I'll talk. You go. Novel by Kris Faatz. Rhymes with Kaatz. 14 Stones. This is the American launch on Tuesday. It will be available on Amazon. I have already pre-ordered my copy.
Gosh.
Look at that. Gorgeous.
Get it in the
there
screen.
You go.
Okay.
You see there's like water down at the bottom, a bear at the top. No spoilers, but
no spoilers. Yeah. Yes.
And then I have this cool banner because I showed Kris that I'm obviously very technical. Here is her. Here are her handles, so you can follow her. You can follow Highlander Press. I know Debbie was on and joining us today too. And I'm just so incredibly excited to have you a part of my orbit now. Really,
thank you.
The book was a joy. I mean, an absolute and utter joy. Obviously, I've shared that I personally want to know more, and I hope you run with that a little bit, not because I said it, but because there's so much more that you can tell, and your storytelling is really beautiful. It's just,
thank you.
It's absolutely beautiful storytelling. So, I think once people read it, they're going to be looking for the next thing. No pressure.
Oh, okay. I'll start thinking about that.
Because it's beautiful writing. And I think it is, I read a lot, and it had a voice that I haven't really heard in a while or ever. So, thank you for bringing your voice to the world, for sharing it with us. Thank you, Highlander Press, for bringing it to America and bringing Kris to us, so we can all talk to her and read her gorgeous, gorgeous novel. Anything else you want to say, Kris, before we sign off?
I don't think so. Thank you so much. This was really fun, and I'm so glad you liked the book, because it is
Girl,
such a
I have
hard
notes.
project.
I have notes for our next conversation, because
great.
So much I want to talk about, but I can't spoil it, right? We got to give people a chance to read it. So let's regroup. All the time, but at the end of July, we'll give people about a month maybe, and then we'll do a review. And join us at Charm City Readers. We're on Facebook. We're Baltimore-based book club. Kris is one of our resident authors, as I like to call her. And enjoy the book. Enjoy the book. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.